Support for Gulf States Gumbo comes from the Britannia Theater Uptown in New Orleans, playing new movies, classics, and unique programming. Celebrate the holidays at the Britannia and don't miss monthly 35 and 70 millimeter screenings. Information at thebritannia.com for all showtimes.
From the Gulf States newsroom, this is the Gulf States Gumbo, your weekly serving of stories from Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I'm public health reporter Drew Hawkins, chopping it up this week. On today's show, the Department of Homeland Security's planned immigration enforcement operation in New Orleans, which officials are calling Catahoula Crunch, is underway. A press release says the operation will target criminal illegal aliens the department claims are roaming free into the New Orleans area, thanks to sanctuary policies for immigrants. DHS officials formally announced the operation Wednesday morning after weeks of speculation. But communities around New Orleans prepared for federal immigration raids in advance, and some residents are taking to the streets to protest. I actually went to one of those protests in New Orleans on Monday night. Several dozen protesters walked from Lafayette Square to City Hall, demanding an end to immigration raids. Last week, 5 people were arrested by Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers outside of a Home Depot in Gretna. It was cold and pouring rain, but even that didn't keep 7th grader Harry Masters from joining the protest.
People at my school and in my community may be immigrants, and I feel like they are very important to the community.
His mom, Diane, said New Orleans doesn't have an immigrant crime problem and described the federal tactics as unnecessary and harmful.
The immigrants in our community are generally really helpful, good people, caring members of the community, and it's not fair to be terrorizing people.
Protesters said they plan to keep organizing as long as Catahoula Crunch continues. To help explain things, I'm joined by Bobbi-Jeanne Misick, who covers immigration issues for Verite News. Hi, Bobbi.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
And WWNO's education reporter, Aubri Juhasz. Hey, Aubri.
Hey, Drew.
So, Bobbi, let's start with you. Can you just take us through the basics here? What do we know about what's happening and what's supposed to be happening?
So we know that things were supposed to kick off this Monday. Reporters, including some of us at Verite, got some tips about where the first operations might take place. But all was quiet until Wednesday when DHS announced that the immigration crackdown had in fact begun. Pretty quickly, we learned that a group of people near the Lowe's home improvement store in New Orleans' 7th Ward were arrested. As of yesterday afternoon, Rich Webster, my colleague at Verite, was working to confirm the names of those folks. Like in Chicago, Border Patrol came parading through the tourist center of the city, Central Business District, and the French Quarter yesterday. And as has been the case in other operations, DHS says agents are going after violent criminals who are not in the country legally. But the records do not match up with the rhetoric. We keep seeing folks with little or no criminal records getting caught in this dragnet approach to immigration enforcement that has become the rule these days.
Yeah, I think I'd seen a video from Border Patrol walking through, the end of Canal Street, which, like you said, sort of matches this parading that you saw in Chicago. How does this fit into what's been going on with immigration enforcement across the state?
Well, I'm going to give you a bit of a history lesson, I guess. For Louisiana politicians and local law enforcement officials who are pro-immigration enforcement, detention, and deportation, Louisiana has been preparing for this moment for years, maybe even since before the Trump administration. Louisiana has the second largest detained immigrant population in the country and the second highest number of immigration detention facilities after Texas. And Mississippi, its neighbor to the east, has the largest immigration detention center in the country. Louisiana is also home to the only rail deportation hub, with a holding facility on the tarmac of an international airport in Alexandria that was built during the Obama administration. And Governor Jeff Landry, who's the former attorney general for the state, is a longtime immigration hardliner and a Trump ally. Since he became governor in 2024, the state legislature has passed strict laws that require local and state law enforcement to cooperate and collaborate with federal immigration enforcement agencies. And they criminalize those who do not wish to go along with what DHS wants them to do. Since the beginning of the year, we've seen dozens of law enforcement agencies in the state sign up for partnerships with ICE that allow their officers to conduct some of ICE's activities, like making immigration arrests and even beginning deportation proceedings. So what we have is a state where most of the law enforcement agencies are willing to do the Trump administration's bidding when it comes to immigration enforcement. We have a governor and many lawmakers who welcome federal immigration forces. And we have the ability to quickly move folks to immigration detention centers and the ability to quickly deport folks.
Yeah, so you've got a lot of factors here that sort of combine to set the stage, sort of prime this area for these sweeps. What are you hearing from people in the immigrant communities?
Well, Drew, people are scared and they're already worn down because it's not like they haven't been targeted until now. We've seen large-scale immigration raids on workplaces across the southern part of the state since the start of the Trump administration. We've seen parents given the choice to either be deported with their U.S. citizen children or be separated from them indefinitely. And advocates are telling immigrants who do not currently have legal status in the U.S. to stay inside their homes and lock their doors, to refuse entry to any immigration officials that show up. But some folks say they can't do that. I spoke to a group of day laborers on Monday who said they were planning to keep showing up to the place where they usually find work because they all have families that they need to provide for.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I think everyone can understand that. I wonder if you can tell me, based on what's happened in other states, what should we expect for the coming months here in Louisiana and in the Gulf South?
Well, on Monday, I spoke with Brandon Lee at the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, who told me here in the greater New Orleans area, we should expect federal agents to treat the city and the suburbs the same. They're not just targeting New Orleans, right? They're going to go to Gretna and Kenner and any other suburban areas where they know there are large concentrations of immigrants. Lee also said we can expect to be surprised by how Border Patrol is willing to push the limits on what can be done lawfully. Here's a quick clip from our conversation.
The brazenness with which they acted sort of on a day-to-day basis, approaching people on the street, explicitly admitting to racial profiling. They were certainly acting as though there would be no accountability and no recourse for their actions.
Lee also acknowledged that the political and immigration detention landscape in Louisiana is very different from Illinois. They have laws that block law enforcement from collaborating with federal immigration agencies. The laws here are opposite of that. So he didn't want to speculate on how that could lead to different outcomes in Louisiana.
I mean, that makes sense, right? It's going to be different in different places. And, here, for example, the city council has launched a reporting system for people who witness what they believe are abuses by federal immigration agents. So it's like they're anticipating potential problems.
Yeah, documenting, alleged abuses serves a bunch of different purposes. But one is that attorneys can then take instances to federal courts and challenge federal immigration agencies.
It makes sense. Thanks for breaking that down for us, Bobbi. And turning to you, Aubri, I know you've been looking at how increased immigration enforcement could impact schools.
Right.
We heard from 7th grader Harry Masters at the protest on Monday night, and he was saying that he was worried about his classmates. Mm-hmm. Do we know how many students may be directly affected?
Yeah, like Bobbi said, there are significant immigrant communities in and around New Orleans, especially in Jefferson Parish. The school district there, about 40% of students are Hispanic, almost 20% are learning English. So this is a big percentage of the student body that, is feeling this crackdown. In New Orleans, the percentages are lower, but they're still significant. Closer to 13% of students identify as Hispanic and 8% are learning English. But then, you have schools where the majority of students are Hispanic and maybe 20, 30, 40, even 50% could be learning English based on the data. So this is not something that is going to be felt the same at every school, but it seems like it's going to be felt at least a little bit at every school and a lot at some schools. And I just want to reiterate here, public schools have a legal obligation to educate students regardless of their immigration status. And as a protective measure, federal law prohibits schools from collecting information on students or families' legal status and citizenship.
Yeah, it brings up a good point, too. This federal law, these protections with school, are school buildings themselves, are they places that federal officers can enter?
Yeah, so not without a judicial warrant. That's one that's signed by a judge, not immigration authorities. Otherwise, they can't get past a school's lobby. And this is something that school districts have been training school staff on for, almost a year now since the Trump administration took office. Training staff that if agents show up, don't let them in, ask to see a warrant, call the school district's attorney. To be clear, we haven't seen agents target schools or arrest parents in other cities like they have targeted specific businesses, apartment complexes, and the like. But people are concerned because schools used to have this added layer of security, and they don't anymore. At the beginning of Trump's second term, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security removed Biden-era measures that placed restrictions on immigration enforcement actions in or near sensitive locations, including schools and school bus stops. ICE said in a statement in September that it's not targeting schools or daycare centers. But there have been news reports of immigration arrests happening near those places. And in one case, agents arrested a person inside a daycare center where they worked.
So you're hearing that schools are training their staff. Have you talked to some of the teachers? What are educators saying about the impacts here so far?
Yeah, school attendance is a really big concern. While we don't have official numbers yet from this week, teachers and school leaders told me they have noticed a dip. In some cases, the dip started before the holiday when there started to be, discussion of likely enforcement. And it's a dip similar to one they saw when President Trump took office in January. What school leaders tell me they're hearing from parents is whether they have legal status or not, they're afraid of being detained and separated from their children. So like Bobbi said, they're staying home as much as possible. And in this case, they're keeping their kids home, too. Those kids are missing school. I want to play a voice memo I received from a teacher this week. We aren't using her name since she's concerned about drawing attention to her school. I've talked to other educators who feel the same way because, they're afraid their community could become a target for immigration enforcement if they speak out.
I had the classmate of one of our absent students ask me if we were ever going to see their friends again. And hearing that really broke my heart because all I could say in response to that student was, I'm just not sure right now.
Some educators told me there are parents who have said they will not send their kids to school until the federal immigration operation in the region is over.
And we don't have a clear vision or, clarification on how long that will be. We've heard that the National Guard may be here. We don't know how involved they are. They may stay through Mardi Gras. I mean, this could end up adding up to a lot of missed school.
Yeah, we're talking about weeks, even months, and we know that will have a huge impact on those students' learning.
And Aubri, I've heard of efforts in other parts of the country to help kids get to and from school so parents can stay home. Is that something that's happening here? Are you hearing that as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, we have had the opportunity as a community to learn from these other places. There's been a lot of collaboration and resource sharing. And there are several community groups here that are organizing volunteers to walk kids, stand with them at bus stops, provide extra eyes around schools in case federal officers are in the area. And the goal is to provide security and to try to convince more families to send their kids to school. The focus for a lot of educators right now is reassuring parents that schools are safe. I received this voice memo from an educator who's an immigrant herself. In it, she speaks directly to families in Spanish.
Sé que este momento no está siendo fácil. Sé que lo que es sentir miedo, sentir incertidumbre y sentir que uno tiene que proteger a sus hijos de todo.
She says she knows what it's like to feel fear, to feel uncertainty, and to feel like you have to protect your children from everything.
Por eso quiero animarlos con todo mi corazón a que sigan trayendo.
That's why I want to encourage you with all my heart to keep sending your children to school, she says. School isn't just a building, it's a place where your children are safe, supported, loved. She doesn't want them to miss out on learning that she says will open doors for them in the future.
What about virtual learning? It feels like that could be an option right now. Is that something people are talking about or thinking about?
Yeah, it definitely is. It's tricky because educators really want kids in school. We saw how learning during the pandemic at home just wasn't the same. And schools in other parts of the country, for example, Chicago, which had its own federal immigration crackdown, they didn't officially offer virtual learning. So while schools have the technology, it's not a switch they can just flick. It requires approvals from higher up. It really needs to be something that's done, systematically. That said, educators have told me they will do whatever they can to keep kids learning, whether or not they come to school. That includes sending materials home, but also posting them online. And I want to leave us with a little bit more sound from that first teacher we heard about, how she and her colleagues are feeling right now.
Our educators are always stepping up with courage and with love and with empathy for human beings. And we shouldn't have to be doing this, but we do because we know that we have an obligation to kids and families.
That was Bobbi-Jeanne Misick from Verite News and WWNO's Aubri Juhasz. Thank you guys so much for breaking things down for us.
My pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
And now it's time for Gulf States Gems. It's our series that shines a light on some of the treasures of our region. And we're going to do things a little differently today. In keeping with this week's episode, we wanted to mention Taqueria Guerrero, a restaurant in New Orleans that recently closed out of concern about immigration enforcement. And we learned WWNO and WRKF Coastal Desk reporter Michael McEwen eats there a couple times a week. And he shared his reflections on the restaurant with us.
Whenever I move somewhere new, one of the first things I check off is finding a good, authentic Mexican restaurant. So I was in luck when I found Taqueria Guerrero within walking distance of my own front door. I'd go for the classics, like a few carne asada tacos, or for their unbeatable pozole when temperatures drop. They were one of the first restaurants in this part of Mid-City to open up after Hurricane Katrina, and really grew this noticeable community of staff and clientele from there. I think it says a lot that they made this decision to temporarily close to keep both their staff and clientele safe. You can say what you want about authenticity, but this kind of place where people can gather and speak a familiar tongue or eat familiar food is now gone, at least for the time being. So the feeling among a lot of people I talked to on their last weekend open was that it's really just this tremendous loss for all of us. And this news that they'd be temporarily closing because of the Border Patrol operation was really jarring, but those last 2 days they were open were so busy with customers wanting to show their support that the line almost wrapped around the block. And I was one of them. And I thought it was kind of beautiful. But it also feels really sudden and almost the opposite of a place with great food and such a light atmosphere.
You can see pictures of Gulf States gems from across the region on our Instagram page. And we want to hear about a place that you consider a gem, a restaurant, bookstore, national park, whatever is a gem to you. Send us your suggestion. Email connect@gulfstatesnewsroom.org. This week's show is cooked up by the Gulf States Newsroom team. Our theme music is by DJ Supreme. Special thanks to our partner stations, WBHM, Mississippi Public Broadcasting, WWNO, and WRKF. You can find us in your podcast feed every Friday. Please look us up and please subscribe. Again, I'm your host, Drew Hawkins. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to stir your roux.